And we are live. DFS Podcast Week 4 live stream. Joe, we've never done this before, man. How you feeling? How does it feel to be up this early? When was the last
Dude,
time you've been up this early?
I'm like a go to bed at 6 a.m. guy. I've seen this side of the daytime from the other side way more often than I've seen it from this side. But I did get like 7 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep last night. So feeling pretty good.
Well, that's not bad. I mean, you could certainly do a lot worse.
Yeah, totally.
I think this slate is shaping out to look pretty fun. I'm really happy that they were able to price Chuba Hubbard up and not make him a free square. He's 5,900. He's projecting pretty well, but if he was going to be in the 4K range, he really could have made this slate kind of not as fun to play. Optimals would have been projecting significantly higher, and that's just not really the case. So we're getting a lot of guys in the 5 and 6K range with a lot of ownership, a lot of guys in the 8K range at running back getting a lot of ownership. So I don't know. Before we start game by game, tell me how you're approaching this slate.
I think we've talked quite a bit in the last few weeks about flipping the construction, and that's a lot harder to do on slates like this because it seems like the vast majority of the field is going to be playing one elite running back, one elite wide receiver, and some just any tight end that's projecting well. So it's kind of hard to say like just pay up at quarterback, just pay up with your stack, just pay up at wide receiver, just pay up at running back and flip the construction because everybody's kind of doing a little bit of that and then getting their value from these like Nick Westbrook kind of players because we do have a little bit of value on this slate and it's not getting outrageously projected in terms of projected ownership on any of the sites that I look at. So it's going to be one of those weeks where getting individual player price point pivot leverage is going to be really key.
Right. I think it's going to be like extra difficult to flip the construction and build leverage that way. I totally agree with you in that regard. One way I do think to do it though would be to play two 6K running backs instead of a 5K running back and an 8K running back or a 6K running back and an 8K running back. Just play two of the 6K running backs or 5K running backs, and then maybe two of the 8K wide receivers. Like you could roll out Trey Sermon, David Montgomery, or maybe Trey Sermon, Chuba Hubbard, and then pay up twice at wide receiver. I think you could get a little bit different that way. So that's probably one way to do it. Otherwise, I agree. I think just finding specific leverage off of individual plays is probably going to be what dictates this slate this week. We've had three low-scoring slates, essentially. Three slates where sharp DFS players should be winning. This slate, I don't really know what to expect, but we're going to go game by game, dive into some DFS game theory here. Giants Saints, 43.5. I'm sorry, a 40.5 implied total. Saints are only 5-point favorites. They opened as 9.5-point home favorites. Talk to me a little bit about this game because Alvin Kamara is projecting for some ownership. He's also projecting very, very well. How are you looking to approach Alvin Kamara? Is he a fade for you?
I don't think he's a fade. I think that you can definitely play him in lineups that are already properly leveraged elsewhere. He projects really well. He's one of the players on the slate that, and actually this kind of leads me into the other thing that I was thinking about when you can flip construction by going the other way this week too and playing two or maybe even three elite or borderline elite running backs, try and get Alvin Kamara and Derrick Henry in the same build and then pay down at wide receiver and or tight end. And I think that'll give you a pretty unique construction too. So yeah, I think that he's definitely not one of those players that you just have to all out fade because of ownership. I think he's going to be relatively reasonably owned actually in the context of this slate. So I think he's totally playable. And also like, Saquon Barkley isn't projecting for that much ownership either. I think he's playable on the other side as well.
I actually like that a lot. I mean, you can probably imply that Derrick Henry lineups really aren't going to have Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara lineups aren't going to have Derrick Henry. You stack them both in the same lineup and pay down at wide receiver. Your lineup's pretty much leveraged. Your construction will be completely different from the rest of the field. So all you can do at that point is focus on getting your projection to as close as whatever optimal you're using. And I think you're in a pretty good spot for GPPs. Alvin Kamara in cash in play for you?
He is, but I think I'm going Derrick Henry just because I think more of the field is going to go Derrick Henry. And in cash, really, that's all you're looking to do is insulate yourself with ownership from the rest of the field. you want to finish in that like 60th percentile, maybe the 70th, so you hit your triple ups. But generally, I think they're both in play. But Derrick Henry was the way I went.
I think in cash, I'd be leaning more towards Derrick Henry too, which is probably going to make some of the DFS grinders vomit. But, it is what it is. You did mention Saquon Barkley, and like, despite the low implied team total, I mean, the Giants wide receivers are dead. Saquon Barkley is probably going to see 10 targets in this game. A lot of people seem to want to play Evan Ingram. I think that's fine, but I would be a lot more inclined to jam in Saquon Barkley, especially if he's going to be under 10% owned. He's the same price this week as he was last week, in a better spot, and is less popular.
Right. I think the other way that you can attack this game, especially if you're playing Alvin Kamara, is to get one of these Giants wide receivers. They don't project all that well, but they're super cheap. We have Kadarius Toney at 3.3K and Colin Johnson at 3.2K. Colin Johnson projects better. He still doesn't project great. But I think that those guys are guys that you can use to build that like star running back scrub wide receiver construction. And still, like, if this game gets a little bit weird, like if New Orleans goes up and Alvin Kamara scores 2 early touchdowns, I think that those guys could end up seeing a lot more targets than they're actually projecting for right now.
Right. And I mean, if a Daniel Jones, Jameis Winston led game got a little weird, would anybody be that surprised?
No, I mean, either of them have 2 early pick sixes or fumble sixes in their range of outcomes, and that would totally flip this game on its head.
So we don't even have to talk about the fact the 2 defenses in this game are both firmly in play.
Right. And one of the things we talked about last week on the Patreon podcast is that don't exclude playing DST against your wide receiver. Probably don't do it against a running back, probably don't do it against a quarterback, but just one wide receiver against the opposing DST, that's really not that big of a deal because at their ceilings, they actually do have a correlation.
Right. And don't forget, John Ross is going to be active today. He's got a projection. It's not very high, but he's got a projection. And like, if any of these guys was going to catch a 50-yard touchdown from Daniel Jones, it's probably John Ross, right? Him or Kadarius Toney. But
I don't want anything to do with that in anything but the largest fields. But I think throwing a large field dart throw at that isn't probably the stupidest thing you could do.
I think if you play a 1% owned John Ross at 3K, you can play whoever the hell you want afterwards in a small or medium field. Like,
sure.
Like, I think that's fine. You're going to give up a little more median projection than you might be comfortable with in those smaller medium fields. But if you play John Ross, then you correlate him with Alvin Kamara, play whoever you want after that. Like, you can play the chalkiest players. If he's going to be 1% owned, you don't need to get much more unique than that in like a 1,000 or 2,000 player contest.
Right.
Anything else from this game? Like, are you interested in some Marcus Callaway leverage over Alvin Kamara, or maybe some Adam Troutman leverage?
I think Callaway is fine. I think Troutman is fine. If you're not playing Alvin Kamara, playing one of those guys is fine. But with this game having such a low total, I think that I'm probably looking to leverage other players, but it's certainly something to think about.
Right. Like, I wouldn't full on game stack this game, but I think it is a very interesting game for secondary correlations just because it's us outside of Alvin Kamara. It's not carrying really any ownership. So if you put a secondary correlation in there, it can include Kamara. It could not include Kamara. Either way, I think you're putting yourself in a pretty good spot because no one outside of Kamara is getting any exposure to this game.
Right, and I'm probably going to be going like pass catcher if I'm doing that, and I'm including Saquon Barkley in the pass catcher category because the two Sterling Shepard is basically the like short and intermediate route guy, and I think Kamara could very well turn into that. It might be Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram is carrying some ownership, but it's not going to be outrageous.
Yeah, like I think you could do something like Kamara Ingram or even Kamara Barkley as like a secondary correlation, but what I think I prefer the most is Kamara John Ross or Kamara Colin Johnson, one of these 3K wide receivers that's not going to get any ownership. All it takes is for them to catch one Daniel Jones bomb in garbage time, and they're going to end up in some optimal lineups.
Right, and those guys are kind of price point leverage on the Nick Westbrook kind seems to be the guy that everybody is going to go to with that low value wide receiver cost. And he's projecting the best out of them, so it makes sense. But those other low-priced wide receivers will get you some leverage there.
Yeah. Chiefs and Eagles. This game is one of the this is the first fun game on the slate that we're going to talk about. Jalen Hurts and Mahomes are projecting pretty similarly. The game's got a 54 implied total. Chiefs are 7-point favorites, but I mean, Philadelphia stacks are projecting well. Chiefs stacks are projecting well. I think you could essentially play whoever the hell you want in this game and build a plus EV lineup. I mean, Tyreek Hill is projecting for right around 10% ownership. I think that seems a little bit low given what he's projecting for. I think he should be coming in somewhere around 15 to 18% ownership. So he's somebody I'm definitely interested in. Something else that I'm noticing here is that the Eagles wide receivers are projecting pretty similarly, but there's $1,000 discrepancy between the two. I mean, Jalen Reagor is projecting for almost 12 points, which really isn't far off from what Devonta Smith is getting, but he's only 4,700. So I think if you're stacking this game, it's a good place to start and get Jalen Reagor, since no one is really eyeing those 4K wide receivers. So I think that's one way to get different, is instead of paying all the way down to the 3K range for Westbrook, you pay down to the 4K range for Jalen Reagor, get a little bit different elsewhere, and I think you're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, neither of them project all that well in the context of this slate, but I think that they both have ceilings, and it wouldn't be surprising at all, with as bad as the Chiefs defense has been this year, to see this game turn into an absolute shootout or even just a high-scoring blowout. Wouldn't be all that surprising. So I'm looking at both sides of this game, and I think one of the ways you can also flip your construction in a way that I think it's better for large field than for smaller field, but I think playing both Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce in a Mahomes stack, or both Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce in an Eagles stack, is viable. It just kind of depends on how much value you can get elsewhere, and you probably have to eat that Nick Westbrook a kind chalk, but I think that your lineup is going to be so different anyway that you're probably okay doing that.
I think you're going to have to eat that Westbrook chalk. You might actually have to play one of the Giants wide receivers too.
I mean, think you have to play two, and you're going to end up having a pretty stars and scrubsy construction, but I think that it's viable.
That'll be different this week, though. I think that should be pretty different.
Yeah.
You know, if a lot of people are playing the mid-range 5 and 6K players with a couple of their 8K players, and they're just punting off tight end to defense to save. I mean, if you punt wide receiver, that's a good place to start to build a different lineup. I feel like Mahomes' ownership might be a little bit owner than expected too. I mean, I think more people are going to be playing Josh Allen than we expect. He's the best projected quarterback on the slate by a lot.
Every single week so far this year, Mahomes has come in under, and I don't really expect that to change this week.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, when Josh Allen is projecting the way he is at the same price point as Mahomes, Allen is going to be the guy that pops. You know,
only people of the rushing playing upside.
Well, yes, exactly. But his rushing upside isn't even what it used to be. Like, I would argue his rushing upside at this point in his career is like, I mean, this is kind of hand in the dirt. This isn't what we really do on this podcast, but like, he scores fantasy points with his arm now. He doesn't run nearly as much as he used to. He runs a little bit more than Mahomes does.
Right. The design QB runs in the red zone are really where you're going to get a higher median projection from Josh Allen based on that.
Yeah, it's just it's not as different as it used to be. So I think you're gonna be different by just playing Mahomes, because I think he's gonna come in half as owned as Josh Allen. His stacks are gonna be half as owned as Josh Allen. He's just hard to do. I think a good way to do it is you play Mahomes, you play one of his high-priced guys, Kelce, Tyreek Hill, doesn't really matter. I think they're kind of the same play. Play one of those guys, play one of his cheaper guys. You can play Hardman, you can play Demarcus Robinson, and then you run it back and save some salary with Jalen Reagor. I think that's going to make your lineup pretty different.
And if you don't want the rest of your lineup to get 2 stars in scrubsy, I think in larger field contests, Quez Watkins is in play in that 3.5K.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think he's definitely in play, especially in stacks of this game. I think you can put him in a secondary correlation with like Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, and that would make a ton of sense. Miles Sanders is 6.4K, and I think he's a great price point pivot leverage play. He's not projecting that great, but that's kind of the theory behind it. If he was, he would be popping in a lot more lineups.
I'm playing Miles Sanders as a correlation. I don't need it to be with my primary stack, but if I'm playing him, I really want to get somebody from the other side of the game in.
100% agree. I mean, if I'm playing anyone in this game, I think I want somebody on the other side. I know the Chiefs are one of those teams where playing their players and their stacks naked is probably more viable than just about any other team. But in this particular game, with the total being as good as it is, and the Chiefs are 7-point favorites, which is a high spread, but it's not the spread on the Bills game right now. So if I'm playing any Chiefs at all, I definitely want to run it back with some Eagles.
Yeah, because you could see them pushing the Chiefs, and that's really what we're looking for, is just that game that gets wild, starts to get some deep touchdowns, starts to get some breakaway runs that really pace up the game and put you into that like 60-plus point category.
Right. And like, I think Miles Sanders is such a perfect guy for that, especially after last week where he got no work. He was on the field for 60% of the snaps, but he never touched the football. He only had 2 carries and 4 targets. And like, I think that could completely change this week. So,
right. And I think that when you get completely blown out like they did, expecting the unexpected from the coaching staff is something that's pretty good to do. So we could see him get a lot more play.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. All right, I think that is a pretty good way to attack this game. I think the Chiefs DST is definitely in play here. I think we could be playing defenses against Jalen Hurts pretty much all year long. It's the same theory behind playing defenses against guys like Lamar Jackson. It can kill you or it could win you a GPP. So I think doing anything like that is totally fine. So we've made our way to the Bills game. 47 implied total. The Bills are 17-point home favorites. 32 implied team total. I believe that is the highest team total on the slate by like 3 points. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't. Yeah, it's the highest on the slate by 1.5 points, only ahead of the Chiefs. So Josh Allen stacks are going to be the chalk. Cole Beasley is going to be popular. I think Stephon Diggs might be a little bit more popular than he's projecting. So how do we feel about just playing the running backs in this game for all the leverage?
I think Zach Moss is fine. Zach Moss seems to be the guy that gets the red zone work, and that's the guy that I want. Like, I don't want a running back that needs to have a 100-yard bonus to get there in this type of game with Josh Allen as the quarterback, because like we're trying to leverage those the red zone carries and the inside the 5 carries. That's really the only reason we play those running backs. And maybe so we can get a little bit of that end of game, run out the clock, add 30 yards, get to the bonus at the end. But I'm totally fine with Zach Moss as a leverage play. I think Singletary's in play, but I prefer Moss just because of the way that they've been used so far this year.
Right. I think they're both in play for leverage, but I mean, something to remember about Zach Moss, and I mean, this could be totally random. It's a 1-game sample, but he played 56% of the snaps last week. He saw receiving work, got 13 carries. He was efficient with it. And like, it was a blowout. Like that game was a blowout. And I think that's part of why Moss got as much work as he did. Like if they trust Devin Singletary more in the satellite back role in close games or when they're trailing, again, total hypothesis. I could be so far off base with this. It's not even funny, but this is literally just a hypothesis. If we think that the Bills want to use Zach Moss as their late game grinder when they've got a 2-touchdown lead or a higher lead, why aren't we playing Zach Moss at home when they're 17-point favorites? Like, he's going to be 3% owned.
Right.
He could score 3 touchdowns in this game and end up as the best leverage play on the slate.
For sure. But the thing is that I don't think this game is going to carry egregious ownership. I think you can still play Bills stacks, especially if you get a little bit different, maybe play a tight end in there, get Dawson Knox in. We aren't going to get that super low ownership from Emmanuel Sanders after what he did last week. And frankly, across the industry, he doesn't really project that well for his ownership. So I think, but I really think that you can double stack, you can single stack, especially if you're getting different elsewhere in your build, maybe running secondary correlations in some of these grosser games and hoping that they get a little bit sideways. I think that the stacks are still very much in play.
Dude, I think there's a world where Stephon Diggs is the lowest owned wide receiver on the Bills.
I think so too. And the other thing that's pretty wild about this is like, you need Houston to push the Bills a little bit if you're going to be playing Josh Allen stacks. So
Yeah.
why not run it back? And nobody really seems to be wanting to run this thing back. Brandon Cooks is
No,
only
nobody.
projecting for like mid-single digit ownership across the industry.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Like, I think this is a spot where I would be running my stack back. I wouldn't be doing it with a running back, but I think I would be doing it. Brandon Cooks obviously makes the most sense. He's still really cheap for somebody that gets as much usage as he's been getting. But I think Anthony Miller is another way to go to save some salary at 3.7K.
Sure, and in larger field, I don't mind going with Chris Conley because he's going to come in almost literally unowned, and he's probably going to be on the field for 60, 70% of the snaps.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good way to go. I still think that my favorite play in this game is Zach Moss, and I don't see that changing.
Sure. I mean, it gives you the most leverage and it gives you the most like direct. It's not like a price point pivot. I don't think there are many other plays on this slate that are going to leverage as many pieces at as high of ownership as Zach Moss will leverage just by playing him by himself.
Right. I agree. Anything else from this game that you want to touch on?
I mean, Bills DST is so expensive that nobody's going to play him. I mean, they're going to be like mid-single digit ownership, and they're probably, if pricing was not a thing, they'd probably be the best play on the slate.
Yeah. All right, here's the game that's getting the most ownership by far. Panthers Cowboys. Cowboys are 4-point favorites. It's got a 51.5 implied total. DJ Moore and Amari Cooper are pretty much projecting for the most ownership of just about any player on the slate. So I think skinny stacks between those two, unless you got really different elsewhere, might be something you want to avoid in GPPs, and just being a little like, if you're skinny stacking this game, I think it's a lot easier to get creative.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you look at guys like Ezekiel Elliott is barely going to carry any ownership. He's still getting a ton of the workload. Even when they get their satellite back and Tony Pollard on the field, Zeke's out there like a third of the time on those plays.
Yeah.
So, and he's projecting well. He's projecting for relatively low ownership, and everything we just said about Zach Moss and all the receivers and the quarterback in the game, that all applies right here too.
Yes, I agree with you. I love the idea of an Ezekiel Elliott leverage play. I mean, he doesn't project all that well, but at 6.5K, you don't need him to. If he comes in at 5% owned and hoards all of the touchdown equity on this team, that's going to bust the Amari Cooper lineups, the Dak Prescott lineups, the Dak Amari or Dak CeeDee Lamb lineups. It's going to bust the Dalton Schultz chalk. Like, Ezekiel Elliott having an 80th percentile outcome performance busts so much chalk that I genuinely think he is right next to Zach Moss as one of the best leverage plays on the slate. I even think that like a skinny stack between Ezekiel Elliott, Chuba Hubbard is 100% in play. Like, if there was ever a week to play 3 running backs to be different, I think it would be this week. Now that so many people have caught on to playing 3 wide receivers, you're going to be different just by playing 3 running backs.
Right. And I think that if you're playing the Ezekiel Elliott leverage, you can afford in most lineups to get to DJ Moore, and that's totally fine. But in larger field, I'm going down to Robbie Anderson. He doesn't project nearly as well, but he is a lot cheaper. He is still one of those like average to above average playable plays on this slate at wide receiver, and he's going to come in literally around a quarter of the ownership of DJ Moore. And in smaller field stuff, it's probably going to be more like a sixth of the ownership.
Right. I like that a lot. And don't forget about Cedric Wilson down there at 4K. Not projecting all that well, but he's probably going to be on the field a decent amount. He's kind of splitting wide receiver 3 snaps with Noah Brown. So it's a little difficult to trust him, but number one, that's why he's not projecting well. And that's why people aren't going to go to him.
Right. And he had red zone usage. He scored a touchdown last week and he was on the field for a big chunk of their red zone plays. So he's the guy that it's worth throwing a dart at that low price point.
Yeah, just know that you pretty much need a touchdown out of him to get you there, because he's probably not going to see the volume for it.
Right. He has a long touchdown in his range of outcomes too, though.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And he's another guy that, like, he's a really good leverage play just over Amari Cooper or CeeDee Lamb. One other leverage play that I really, really like in this game is Blake Jarwin. Blake Jarwin, he doesn't project all that different from Dalton Schultz. He's about the same price, but he's going to carry literally a fraction the ownership.
Right, and I think that we've got a little bit of recency bias going on with Dalton Schultz. Like if you actually sit and watch that game that they played last week, you can see that Blake Jarwin is also running a route on a lot of those plays that Dalton Schultz caught passes on. So it could have just been
Right.
a defensive scheme situation. It could have been that was what they'd worked up because they thought that the Eagles were going to focus more on Jarwin. Like, who knows why they did it, but it's not something that I think we should be believing that is set in stone for this offense.
Yeah, I mean, Dalton Schultz played 9 more snaps than Blake Jarwin did last week. I'm sure he ran a few more routes, but Dalton Schultz or Blake Jarwin catches passes too. Like I think it's pretty much set that Blake Jarwin is their blocker and they're going to use him to block more often than they're going to use Dalton Schultz to block, but like they will use Blake Jarwin to catch passes. And if Blake Jarwin catches a touchdown and Dalton Schultz doesn't, that's alpha leverage.
Yep.
Yeah, it's all about like I don't know. I like that one a lot actually. Anything else from this game that you're interested in? It looks like some people might actually play Tommy Tremble.
He's actually gotten a lot of industry pub this week, and I don't really know why, but he's still carrying low enough ownership that we can look at him as a leverage play on the other side of the ball. And he's cheap.
I mean,
dirt cheap.
He's stone cold min for a tight end. Like, I mean, is a 2 for 8 and 2 touchdowns really that far out of his range of outcomes? Think about how much chalk that one busts.
Yeah, I think he's definitely in play, especially in larger field stuff. There's certainly much better tight end plays and probably better tight end leverage plays on this slate than him, but I think that he's certainly in the player pool this week.
It interests me a lot that everyone's going to go to DJ Moore, but nobody seems to want to go. No, everyone wants to play DJ Moore, but nobody wants to take Sam Darnold with him, even though Darnold and Prescott don't project all that differently. It's like a 2.5 point, maybe 3 point difference. Yeah, like I think Darnold stacks are perfectly viable in just about any contest, anything larger than like 1,000 entrants.
Right. They project really well too because he's quite a bit cheaper. But I think the one thing you really can't do unless you're playing ultra small field is just stack Dak, Amari Cooper, and DJ Moore in the same lineup. I think that projects the best. It's going to give you that top projection. It might even be in your optimal depending on what projection set you're using. But if you play that and you don't get really, really different elsewhere in your lineup, you're basically shooting for a min cash there.
Yeah, do something a little bit different. Like if you're trying to play Dak, Amari, DJ Moore, I would just pivot to Dak, Amari, Robbie Anderson, or Dak, Lamb, DJ Moore, or Dak, Lamb, Chuba Hubbard. You know, just get a little bit different because, you know, Dak, Amari, DJ Moore, that is going to be the most popular stack on the slate.
It's a little bit more viable if you correlate your quarterback with one of these really low owned tight ends that we were just talking about. It's not going to project as well, but it definitely gives you more leverage.
The last thing I want to talk about for this game is do we think with Elijah Mitchell being ruled out, Trey Sermon opening up at 5K, do we think Trey Sermon is going to pull some ownership off of Chuba Hubbard?
I do, but I also think that we're going to see a little bit different constructions from the field because we have those 2 5K running backs that are projecting. Well, actually, it's more like 3 or 4 5K running backs that are projecting really well. So we might just see more people paying down at running back than we would if we wouldn't have gotten Elijah Mitchell ruled out. But generally, I think yes.
Trey Sermon projecting the way he does is going to change this slate a lot because right now he's projecting for no ownership. That's not going to hold. Like at all. He's going to go from projecting for 1% ownership up to like 10 or more. Cause like right now he's popping in optimals across the industry. So
and I think that's going to change. People are waiting for the inactives to come out before they throw their last round of updates for ownership out there. Cause I mean, that's what I'm doing, but I would project him somewhere between 6 and 8%. And I wouldn't be all that surprised if he comes in with double-digit ownership. Trey Sermon.
No, me neither. And like, that's one of the reasons why I'm more than comfortable, regardless of ownership, I'm more than comfortable going after Chuba Hubbard. I'm fine eating that chalk. So we've got Browns Vikings next, 51.5 implied total. This game's basically a pick 'em. Right now it's the Browns -1 on the road, but both of these teams with pretty good team totals. And for some reason, like this game does not have any ownership. I mean, Dalvin Cook might get some steam now that he's expected to play, but even I don't think Dalvin Cook is going to be as owned as he probably should be. And like, how often have we seen this where the running back that missed last week comes back the next week? Oh, he's going to be limited, can't play him. He's 4% owned and he scores 3 touchdowns. Like that's a tale as old as time.
That was how we won last year. Like, in a nutshell,
Correct.
the weeks that we won were those weeks.
It was a pretty lit week in the Discord the week Dalvin Cook returned from injury and scored 50 DraftKings points. Yep. That was a good week for the Discord.
We were all over him.
Yeah, he's 8.1K, projecting for a little over 10% ownership, but like, I think he's got something about that seems a little bit wrong. I don't think the field will go to him a little bit as much. I think his efficient ownership is somewhere around 15%. And there are going to be contests, especially in the smaller field ones and the lower stakes ones, where he comes in at like 7% owned compared to like 20% owned Derrick Henry, 20% owned Alvin Kamara. Like, there's a world here where Dalvin Cook is one of the best leverage plays on the slate.
Right. He projects worse, so we can expect him. It's one of those things with field size, you're going to see chalk get chalkier and the lower owned players get lower owned. And I think that he's definitely in the top of that lower owned tier just because of how well Kamara and Henry are projecting this week. But I do think it's just, we keep going back to this every single week. Nobody wants to play Kirk Cousins or his wide receivers. And if Dalvin Cook does come in with 10+% ownership in these contests, especially in the larger field stuff and some of the like sharper field categories, I think that Jefferson and or Thielen are both really viable this week.
Yeah, I agree with you, but KJ Osborne is still in the 3K range and no one's going to play him.
Right. Everybody wanted to play him last week. Nobody's going to play him this week. You can get to Cousins, Jefferson, Osborne stack, still have a ton of salary to do with whatever you want on the slate. And Cousins is a guy that we're almost always stacking with 2 pass catchers. It's going to be really rare when he runs a touchdown in. So I want 2 pass catchers, and I think you can play Thielen and Jefferson, but I think you can play either of those guys with KJ Osborne or with Tyler Conklin as well, and you're getting just massive relative value if that stack hits its ceiling.
This is the best game on the slate for secondary correlations. The best game on the slate, and I don't think it's close. You could do Dalvin Cook, OBJ. You can do Justin Jefferson, OBJ. Adam Thielen, Kareem Hunt. Adam Thielen, Nick Chubb. I don't care how you do it. Play whoever the fuck you want in this game as a secondary correlation. Get a one-on-one stack. Whatever you want. Anything that implies this game shoots out, because that's the type of total it has, with the teams having similar team totals, or the implied total over 50. It's just, I honestly, I think there are more ranges of outcomes where a secondary correlation from this game is in most optimals across DraftKings and FanDuel than any other game on the slate.
I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is also in play in larger field stuff. Austin Hooper is in play in larger field stuff. Like, none of these guys are going to carry any ownership, and they all project decently. They don't project very well, but they project decently enough that you're getting, you just pick your price point leverage. If you're not playing a 7K running back in that lineup, play Nick Chubb. If you're not playing a 6K running back in that lineup, play Kareem Hunt. If you're trying to get leverage on those, like the Robert Woods of the world, the CeeDee Lambs, like, get OBJ in there. OBJ is a little cheaper than those Cowboys wide receivers, but I mean, he's basically an Amari Cooper leverage spot. So I think all of them, especially as secondary correlations in a game with this high of a total, are more than in play. I think you need to have some of these guys in your lineups.
I agree with you. And I'm glad you mentioned Austin Hooper, because he projects a little bit better than Tyler Conklin, but he's going to be like a 5th as owned. I think Austin Hooper is one of the best tight end plays on the slate at 3.7K. The Browns are still missing Jarvis Landry. Like, it's been very clear that, you know, they don't have as much confidence in these younger wide receivers as they did in a guy like Jarvis Landry. So playing somebody like Austin Hooper at 3.7K, you're getting direct price point leverage off of some of these punt tight ends like Evan Ingram. Like, is there really that big of a difference between Hooper and Evan Ingram, aside from the fact Hooper's in a better offense that's going to score more points?
God, I don't think so, no.
Yeah, like I'm in love with this game. I think this is probably one of the best games on the slate to attack, especially from the secondary correlation point of view. Like, I think if you get a secondary correlation in here from this game that includes Austin Hooper, like you go Jefferson Hooper, that opens you up to do whatever the hell you want anywhere else, because Hooper might be 1% owned.
Right. And I think, like, did people forget last week that Kareem Hunt just nuked?
Yeah, Kareem Hunt went freaking nuclear. He's 6K, and now he's price point leverage because all the other 6K running backs are getting ownership.
Yeah. And like, he's not a great play. He's going to be splitting the workload like 50-50. But if this game gets weird, Kareem Hunt might catch a lot of passes.
Right. Yeah, I like that call a lot. I think Nick Chubb is viable. I won't be going to Nick Chubb as often, but I think he's viable in a secondary correlation stack. It's just for the price, he doesn't project that well. So he's probably more of a large field play where you're hoping for a 90th percentile outcome from him. I think right now my favorite play from this game is the skinny Jefferson Hooper stack or Dalvin Cook Hooper, but I think I'm probably going to end up with more Hooper from this game than any other player.
I think you can get really weird with it too and go KJ, because KJ Osborne is going to correlate with a really high scoring, lots of passing attempts game, and so is Kareem Hunt. And that's like an ultra large field play that if it hits, like nobody's going to have that.
Right. I agree with you. I like that call. All right. We've made our way to Colts Dolphins. This game looks kind of gross. I believe Wentz should be playing, but we've got no Tua. It was announced this morning that Tua should be playing probably 2 weeks from now. He's got the rib injury. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not really interested in this game. I'm sure there are some secondary correlations we can come up with, but otherwise, there's a lot of high totals on this slate. I don't really see the reason to go down to Colts Dolphins with a backup quarterback playing for the Dolphins.
I do think that as price point leverage, Myles Gaskin is in play because a lot of those 5K running backs are going to be getting a ton of steam and he's going to get almost none. But it's definitely a larger field play. It's not something that I'm looking to do in small single entry contests. And I basically want nothing to do with the receivers in that game. Like if they nuke, they didn't hurt you anyway. So you might not bink because they are the guys that are in the top optimal lineup. But I'm not seeing enough price point leverage with enough ceiling to really get these guys in any of my lineups.
Maybe like a Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman skinny stack. I think that's playable. It's just, it's not something I'm in love with.
So poorly, I'm probably not even getting there.
They need touchdowns. They're going to be guys that need raw touchdowns because they're probably not going to do any like 8. I guess Pittman can do that 8 for 125 outcome at 5.4K. So that's probably fine. It's just, like I said, I would be comfortable Xing this game out, not creating any secondary stacks in my player pool. I could probably just move on from this game. And, if this is the game you had to have, then I lose this week.
The defenses are pretty good price point pivot leverage off of some of those really chalky defenses though too. So definitely keep those guys in your player pool.
Right. I'm down to play DSTs against Carson Wentz and Jacoby Brissett pretty much all day. All right. We've made our way to Titans Jets. Derrick Henry's projecting as probably the highest owned player on the slate. And I mean, just as well, he's projecting insanely well. Game's got a 44.5 implied total. The Titans are only 6-point favorites over the Jets. Like, this isn't really a Bills-Texans situation where the Bills were like the most likely outcome for the game is the Bills winning by 3 scores. This Titans game, like the Titans might suck. Like they've looked pretty bad. They're going to be missing their top 2 wide receivers. There's that Nick Westbrook chalk that's creeping up on us in the 3K range. No one wants to play any Jets. No one really wants to play any Titans outside of Henry and Nick Westbrook. So, what are you doing? How are you attacking this game?
Corey Davis is going to carry a little bit of ownership. I think he's still a good play. I think that if he comes in below 10%, his ownership is still pretty efficient because he probably gets the vast majority of the important passing game work as far as the wide receivers go on that game. I think that Michael Carter is a guy that we can really look at in this game. He's so cheap that all you really need is for him to get you like 50 yards with 3 receptions and a touchdown. And that's definitely within his range of outcomes. I mean, that's not going to get you the ceiling outcome, but anything more than that is going to be completely fine to get you value at that 4.5K price point. I also think that I'm not completely sure why. It must just be because of what Tannehill said about Nick Westbrook-Akine. But how different of a play is Nick Westbrook-Akine than Chester Rogers?
It seemed kind of like the same play to me.
Like they're almost the same price. Chester Rogers is only $100 more. They project really similarly, but Chester Rogers is going to come in with a quarter of the ownership. I think that he might be. We talked about some of those really good running back leverage plays that leverage the wide receivers. I think he is the version of that as a wide receiver in a game where Derrick Henry's going to carry a bunch of ownership. Nick Westbrook-Akine is going to carry a bunch of ownership. Like Chester Rogers, I don't even think you need to be that large of a field. He projects pretty well. You can play him in like medium and small field contests, and he's going to get you a ton. Like Derrick Henry might come in at 30% owned in a 1,000-person contest, and Chester Rogers might come in under 1.
You could do the same thing with Josh Reynolds. I mean, Chester Rogers, Josh Reynolds, they're the same play, and both of them give you a ton of leverage. I mean, there's a world where Westbrook-Akine comes in quite a bit more owned than 10%, being that he's a starting wide receiver at 3K this week. And especially in those lower stakes, like he's projected for 10% owned, but that's closer to like milli maker ownership. That's not really, like smaller field. In smaller field, you might be expecting him for closer to 15 or maybe even 20.
I think if there's one player on this slate that makes us throw our phone at the wall when the ownerships flip over, when this game starts, it's him. Like TJ Hawkinson last week, everybody was projecting him for 10 to 15, maybe 20% tops, and he came in at 30. I could totally see Westbrook-Akine coming in at 15 to 25% in those smaller field contests.
He's a guy I don't need to play. There's like, I don't need to play him because Chester Rogers is the same play. Josh Reynolds is the same play. There's guys in other games with higher totals that are the same play. Like, what's the difference between Westbrook-Akine and like KJ Osborne? Like, yeah, Westbrook-Akine might play a few more. They might play more snaps, but like, we've already seen KJ Osborne catch bombs, and that game's got a higher total. He's got a better team total, so there's a bigger chunk of the. There's more raw point potential. So like, I don't know. I really don't see the incentive of playing Westbrook-Akine. I think there's other plays that project for significantly lower ownership and the same raw points.
I have a Michael Carter Westbrook-Akine secondary correlation in one of my medium field contests. I think that there is a world where he comes out and nukes, and he probably doesn't carry enough ownership that him going for 25 points this week doesn't matter for you. Like he's not going to carry 30-40% ownership where that doesn't even get you to the cash line if the rest of your lineup does like what it's supposed to do. But yeah. I generally agree, especially the larger field you get, the more likely I am going to be to go down to a Chester Rogers, go to a Josh Reynolds, or go to one of those other 3K wide receivers in the other games. Like even in that Giants game, the total sucks for the team. But there's 2 3K range wide receivers in that game that are great price point pivots off of Nick Westbrook-Akine.
Yeah. All right. So Lions, Bears, 42 implied total. People are going back to Justin Fields. The team total's a bit better than it was last week. The Bears are 3-point favorites, 22.5 implied team total. That's still not very good. Justin Fields is going to start. He had one of the worst rookie debuts I've ever seen in my life. And the Bears fan in me died a little inside last Sunday.
One net passing yard.
Yeah, that's. I mean, he was sacked 9 times, and they weren't all Matt Nagy's fault. Some of them were. Matt Nagy wasn't doing anything creative with Justin Fields. So, like, just as a football fan for a second, like Matt Nagy should probably be like burned at the stake for what he did last week. But Justin Fields looked bad too. Justin Fields wasn't doing himself any favors. So
I'm glad he wasn't actually a game time decision this week though. Cause like, that's just not fair to that quarterback room to be like, all right, we don't know who's going to play. We'll let you know 2 hours before the game.
Yeah. That's hashtag so Matt Nagy, but like people are going to play Justin Fields and he's really not projecting any better than he did last week. I get that this is a softer defense matchup. So it could be a little bit easier for him. So, I mean, I think if you want to stack Fields with like Allen Robinson or maybe Fields with Darnell Mooney's like really cheap.
Darnell Mooney's in that conversation that we were just having.
Yep.
He doesn't project that well, and this game has a pretty gross total. I think the one thing we need to start with here, though, in this game is that
what do you mean he doesn't project that well? I mean, he's under 4K projecting for almost 11 DraftKings points.
I have something different.
Fair enough.
You have to remember that I'm looking at different projections than you too.
Yeah, I mean, how different,
2.5 points from what you just said.
That's still not bad though. I mean, he's
No,
still
he's
projecting.
fine. He
Yeah,
projects
he's
the same as those other 3K wide receiver range guys that we were just talking about that we were
Yeah.
trying to leverage Nick Westbrook-Ikine with.
Right. You know who really projects poorly is probably Allen Robinson. But he's also 5.8K. When was the last time Allen Robinson was 5.8K? Like 2018?
Right. And one of the reasons that you're actually looking at these plays is because Detroit as a DST is going to come in larger field GPPs, probably in that 15 to 20% range, and cash somewhere around 50%. So like in smaller field GPPs, we can expect Detroit to come in somewhere between 15 and 30% ownership. Just leveraging a defense like that always makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you can leverage the Detroit DST chalk with a one-off Bears player, and it's going to make a ton of sense. Whether maybe not David Montgomery because he's going to be like 20% owned. So I mean, I think the leverage kind of balances itself out there. But you can leverage him with Darnell Mooney or Allen Robinson, and I think that makes a ton of sense. Particularly Allen Robinson, because if Robinson nukes, the Detroit defense probably busted.
Right,
completely.
Unless they scored a touchdown, because Robinson probably does better in higher passing volume games. But I think that's the other reason you play those receiving weapons and Justin Fields. Like, I'm not that interested. I don't think Justin Fields probably has a ceiling game this week, and he's not in that free quarterback price range. But David Montgomery's going to come in at like 20 to 25% ownership in smaller field stuff. He's like the guy in that 5 to 6K range that it seems everyone is going to go to. So why not play a receiver to leverage him?
Okay, but like you're getting direct leverage off of David Montgomery. You're leveraging both David Montgomery and Detroit Lions DST chalk with a Justin. You could play Justin Fields naked, and you're getting direct leverage over two massive chalk points, or you could play Justin Fields and stack him with a wide receiver and massive leverage. So
we're not stacking him with two wide receivers, though. We need to see him throw the ball and get to a point where he's getting like 30 pass attempts and completing 60% of them before we're going to do that.
I think I'd most optimally stack him with Darnell Mooney because I think Mooney is a bit more likely to pay off his salary with one target than Allen Robinson.
Right, and this is one of those things that you can do. I've talked about this on previous podcasts where you could play Fields, Mooney, and then you could play a game stack from another game. Because that's so cheap that you can play like three relatively high price pieces from another game without the quarterback. And then you've got all the points except the quarterback points from that other game. And with your price point being that low, other people probably can't fit the other pieces that you're playing as well.
I like it. I like it a lot. So one thing that I've been playing around with to leverage DeAndre Swift is playing Jamal Williams at no ownership. They're almost at like a 50% split.
We are usually going to see Swift get a little bit more passing game work, but they're certainly not as different as the field thinks they are. Like 1/16th the ownership, that's definitely not efficient.
I mean, like, what if, like, just God willing, what if Justin Fields comes out balls today, throws 2 touchdowns, scores another on the ground, and this game gets a little wacky? Jamal Williams is going to get like 5 targets and 13 carries. Right next to Swift getting roughly the same workload, except maybe with a couple targets. Like, what if the touchdown variance bounces in Jamal Williams' way? Jamal Williams scoring 2 touchdowns or scoring a touchdown, that almost busts DeAndre Swift.
I think I would prefer in that case, we're talking about Justin Fields coming out hot. If this game gets weird, the total goes over 50, maybe even over 60. I think that the guy that I'm looking at is TJ Hawkinson over Jamal Williams. I mean, I don't mind the Jamal Williams play, but TJ Hawkinson, he's a little bit overpriced, but he's certainly a guy that can get you 2 touchdowns and 100 yards.
No one's going to play TJ Hawkinson because of that, though. And like, yeah, 5.8K is expensive, but this is a guy that's got 10 receptions, the 100-yard bonus, and a touchdown in his range of outcomes. It's significantly lower probability, but is there really that big of a difference between him and George Kittle?
No, I mean, there is a difference, but it's not a substantial difference.
It's just not a big one. TJ Hawkinson's got less competition for targets.
Yep.
Like, I mean, is the probability that Hawkinson sees 10 targets any different than the probability George Kittle does? I would argue it's in Hawkinson's favor.
I think it's in Hawkinson's favor. I think the thing that drops Hawkinson is that their team total is 8 points lower than San Francisco's.
Yeah, it's just gross. It's
We
just
need a weird game. We need this game to not go how Vegas says. Like, if you're going to stack this game, you may as well bet the over too.
yeah, I think if I'm stacking this game, and I'm probably going to in at least one lineup in a larger field where I go like Fields, Mooney, Williams, or Fields, Mooney, Hawkinson, and then stack two other games with secondary correlations in that lineup. I think I'm going to do that in like the daily dollar or something, or maybe even the play action.
Yeah, it's not something we want to be throwing like a $27 entry at. It's not a very high probability play, but it's certainly in the range of outcomes that this thing gets weird.
I probably wouldn't do it in the small fair catch or what's the $27 contest on DraftKings? Because I'm going to play that today. It's not the huddle. What's that? What's the name of that contest? I don't remember.
Side.
It's the blind side. Yeah, I'm because I'm probably going to play the smaller blind side. I love that contest. I love that payout structure. Realistically, if you do that, you don't have to get different anywhere else. But I think I have a different plan for that contest.
If you can afford the blind side, it's probably the best contest on DraftKings. Like if you get up into those like $50 and $100 contests, there are similar contests, but that $27 blind side is probably the best contest on DraftKings.
I really think there's a significant difference between the competition in the blind side and the competition in like the $50 and $100 single entry GPPs too. Like that right, is I was going to say that's like the line. I was going to say that's like the line between where you go from casual players to sharp players. There are casual players that are throwing a $27 entry there, but once you get up to 50, the casual players are a lot less likely to play those contests. So I think that's one of the reasons why I'm interested in the blind side.
Right. The fair catch is going to have softer money at $12 than the blind side is, but it's also a much bigger contest. So you need to get lower probability plays in there anyway.
Well, there's a couple of fair catches though. Isn't there like a 1900 entrant fair catch?
I think that they're 10,000 and maybe when they respawn, but I think that they're 100. There's 100K and a 300K, and the 300K is like 23.5K entrance or something.
I don't play that one. I know with the fair catch I play. I thought, let me look. I think there's like
they respawn one that's like 5,000 entries usually.
Maybe that's the one I play, but I thought the one that I played was significantly smaller. And I want to keep going with this conversation because I think contest selection is just so important and no one talks about it on DFS podcasts. Right. Literally no one talks about it.
Right. And I think that generally people are playing way too big of contests. Like that's why I'm talking about the blind side is such a good contest to play because I get it. The upside is only $5,000 for that smaller one. But you're paying $27. You can win $5,000 if you take first place. You don't need to get quite as much leverage to get there and win that contest because you're not going to need the nuts. Like the odds of somebody having the nut lineup in a 2,200 person contest is like next to nothing. It's single entry, so you're not going to have to compete with multiple instances of these sharper players. Like blindside, smaller fair catch. I even like if you look at the screen pass, that 3max $15 contest, these are all great contests to enter.
Yo, Joe, there is a 25K slant this week. 2x min cash, 2,500 to first. It's only 3,200 entrants.
All right, well let's hustle through the rest of this so I have time to build a lineup for it.
I just reserved a seat. I'm playing that contest. I just reserved a seat. I'm playing that one. I like that. That's got a great payout structure. That's awesome. We got the football team and the Falcons. So I can tell you right now, one of my favorite plays on the slate is Kyle Pitts. And he's going to be my favorite play on the slate. I'm going to play him every week until he hits because he's getting the usage. He's getting the targets. It's just a matter of realizing the equity of those targets. So
do you remember the conversation that we just had about TJ Hawkinson and George Kittle?
Right.
Is Kyle Pitts not in that exact category too?
He is.
Like we haven't seen him do it yet, but he's getting the target share. He's actually cheaper than those two at 5K. He's carrying almost no ownership. And look, he's projecting really well. Like he's not projecting as one of the best point per dollar plays on the slate by any means, but his median projection we can assume is actually kind of low because we haven't seen him realize any of his air yards or his target share yet.
And I just think it's so easy. Like a Terry McLaurin, Kyle Pitts secondary correlation is just too easy. Or even like a De'Ami Brown, Kyle Pitts secondary, an Antonio Gibson, Kyle Pitts secondary correlation, however you want to do it. Like, I think if I'm playing Kyle Pitts, I want the secondary correlation. Gibson is projecting really well. The ownership is there for Gibson, but I think if you're correlating him with Kyle Pitts, that stack is going to be low enough owned that you're fine eating the Gibson.
I
Gibson's
think
not
his
even really
ownership is
chalk.
efficient too.
Kyle Pitts or Antonio Gibson?
Antonio Gibson.
I agree.
I think he's efficient
Like,
at 10 to 12% ownership.
I don't think he should be 5%, but I don't think he should be 15%. So I think where he's coming in is like fine.
Yeah. I think Terry McLaurin's a great play in this game too.
Yeah, me too. Like, I think Terry McLaurin, Kyle Pitts is probably going to be one of my higher owned secondary correlations, right next to some of those coming from the Vikings-Browns game. Is there anything? I mean, I'm not really looking to completely game stack this contest, so I'm really mostly looking for secondary correlations.
I think
what else are
Heineke
you
stacks
looking
are
for?
in play.
Would you do it in a large field, or is that something you're comfortable doing in like a 4,000 person contest?
I think either way, he's projecting pretty darn well. He's projecting for almost no ownership. I'm probably not. He does have some rushing upside. He gets wild. I don't think they're designed runs, but we've seen him get outside of the pocket and run, especially in the red zone. But I think that playing him with one of his pass catchers, either Logan Thomas or Terry McLaurin, probably not both, but I wouldn't argue if you wanted to do both. I think that's completely viable. This should be a competitive game, and both of these defenses have shown that they do have some holes. So I'm totally fine. And honestly, in larger field stuff, Matt Ryan is just so cheap that like betting on him not being dead and gone and in the grave for one game isn't the worst idea either.
It's got a 47.5 implied total, and the game is basically a pick 'em. So like there's some scoring that's being implied in this game, and I'm kind of with you. I think Heineke stacks are fine. Like, is there really that big of a difference between a Heineke stack and a Justin Fields stack, aside from the leverage that a Justin Fields, the direct leverage that a Justin Fields lineup is going to give you?
No, and I think Taylor Heineke's a better raw play.
Yeah, I mean, he's projecting better. He's projecting better at slightly less ownership. So I'm
and I
with
think
you there.
he's more likely to support his pass catchers than Justin Fields is at this point too.
I would agree with you. I would rather double stack Taylor Heineke than Justin Fields. I'm with you.
Yeah, I think that Heineke, at their price points, Heineke, McLaurin, Logan Thomas, ran back with basically anyone that's projecting well on the Atlanta side of the ball is totally in play.
Yeah. And just so we're clear, 1% owned, JD McKissick is 100% in play in this game. If Antonio Gibson's going to be over 10% owned, and I think in some smaller contests he might be, JD McKissick's a pretty elite leverage play.
Right, and he's going to get work anyway. Plus, we've seen Gibson on the injury report questionable all week. Would we be that surprised if he took one hit and he was like, I can't do this?
Yeah, it's the first quarter, and we all get the notification saying Gibson is limping off the field. That's the thing. Is like, I think I could full fade Antonio Gibson on this slate and not be that scared. But if I'm doing it, I'm going to be overexposed to JD McKissick.
Yeah.
Or Terry McLaurin.
Or Logan Thomas, just somebody that leverages.
Yeah, they're all fine. They're all fine. But yeah. Anything else in this game that you want to touch on?
Obviously, both defenses are in play.
Yes. Cardinals Rams, it's got the highest total on the slate, I believe, at 54. The Rams are 4.5 point favorites. I think Kyler Murray is going to be pretty criminally underowned in this contest. I'm wrong, by the way. Chiefs Eagles has the highest implied total, but this is second. So Matthew Stafford's weapons are going to be really popular, but it doesn't look like a ton of people want to play Matthew Stafford. I think he's going to be efficiently owned, at least in a vacuum. But if his wide receivers are going to be as owned as they're projected, like, I don't understand why he's not getting more steam.
I think it's all about pricing. People want that rushing upside, and Matthew Stafford doesn't give you that at 7K. But
yeah,
I think he's one of the better stackable quarterbacks on any slate. And you can get a little bit different. Like, Higbee's not going to come in with a ton of ownership on this slate. So you can go, especially in smaller field stuff, and just grab Stafford, Kupp, and Higbee and then run it back on the other side with whoever you want to throw a dart at. Like, if you probably don't have the salary left over to get to DeAndre Hopkins at that point, and he doesn't really project very well for his price, but like, run it back with Chase Edmonds, Christian Kirk, Rondale Moore, AJ Green. Like, any of these guys could score 1 or 2 touchdowns and get you there. I think Hopkins is in play, but just based on the pricing, it's going to be hard to build a lineup that projects well if you're already stacking the other side of the game.
Right. Another great game for secondary correlations. I think there's some elite leverage plays in this game too. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins at 2% owned is very enticing. I think Van Jefferson under 4K projecting for somewhere around 10 DraftKings points is a very enticing leverage play. And then we've got Darrell Henderson, who is expected to play, projecting really, really well in that 5K range. And I don't think a ton of people are going to play him. A ton of people won't play Chase Edmonds. Like, there is just all sorts of great leverage plays in this contest that I want pieces of.
Do you remember the conversation that we had about 45 minutes ago about Ezekiel Elliott, and before that, who was the other one? Zach Moss?
Yes.
Darrell Henderson is the exact same play.
Same play. It's the exact same thing. If everyone is playing multiple wide receivers from one team, play the running back. Because the running back is the highest probability of any of the three of them to hoard all the touchdown equity, and people don't really like to account for that.
And Darrell Henderson's been questionable all week, so we can expect his ownership to come in a little bit lower than you would. Like, if he had been practicing all week, I think we see him come in at 10+% ownership. But I think mid-single digits is totally reasonable since he has that questionable tag.
Right, like in the smaller stakes,
especially in an afternoon game.
He's going to be a great late swap option.
Yeah.
He's going to be I think a lot of guys in this game could be great late swap options. But somebody like Darrell Henderson in like lower stakes, smaller field where people are a lot more risk averse. And like, I mean, I'm of the belief that people play too conservative in these smaller field GPPs. I understand you can eat some chalk, but I still think people get awfully too conservative and they're not willing to play some of those 1 to 3% owned guys for leverage. Darrell Henderson in those contests could come in under 5% owned.
Yeah, it wouldn't be surprising at all. Like, especially in that blind side we were just talking about with like 2,200 entrants. That's a contest where we can expect him to come in between like 3 and 5%. He might be 7, he might be 8, but even at that point, like, we can expect the wide receiver, like Kupp is going to come in over 20. Woods is going to come in over 15. Like, they might be 25 and 20 respectively.
Yeah, and then you just play Darrell Henderson at sub 5% owned, and he scores 2 touchdowns and just obliterates that chalk.
And I want to be clear that we don't do this live stream like this every week. So when we talk about that, we're not saying Darrell Henderson is a better play than Cooper Kupp. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that if Darrell Henderson scores the touchdowns in this game and Cooper Kupp doesn't, that's when you win all the money by playing Darrell Henderson.
Right. DeAndre Hopkins, I think people are way too cowardly, and that's reflected in his ownership projection. If DeAndre Hopkins is going to be 2% owned, I could play him in 50% of my lineups.
Sure. I mean, I'm gonna be a little bit risk averse there, just because I've never seen this is a hand in the dirt take, but I've never seen DeAndre Hopkins take a play off until last week, and I watched him just kind of get jammed at the line of scrimmage and stop last week.
I mean, yeah, he was a lot more questionable than he was this week, though.
Sure.
So, I mean, we've known all week that Hopkins was going to play, and that was we were dead set on Hopkins not playing last week, and that, I mean, it was the opposite this week. He's been practicing fully all week. So, all right, we got 3 games left, and I think pretty much all of them can be fun. Seahawks 49ers. Now, the Seahawks 49ers game, I think, could really be one of the games that dictates the slate. It could be a popular late swap option if people don't hit on their early games. So, I don't know, man. Russ stacks seem great. We talked about Jimmy Garoppolo stacks earlier. I think if Trey Sermon's ownership projection hasn't updated, it really should, because he's not going to be like 1 or 2% owned. He's probably going to be closer to 10.
Right. At least 5. There's no way he's coming in the low single digits.
No, I mean, if he's popping in optimals across the industry, he's going to be owned. He's going to be a lot more owned than he's projected for. And I haven't refreshed since we started the podcast.
Yeah, he just updated on one of the sites that I look at, and it's 15. So that shifts ownership for the whole slate.
Yes.
But I think if we can go, I'll go look at all of my aggregate projections real quick. Who was the other guy that was in that price range that we were looking at as chalk?
The other guy in that price range?
There's Mike
We've got
Davis
Chuba Hubbard, who's like 800. I think Chuba Hubbard, David Montgomery were the guys.
Okay. And I think that they're all staying relatively the same across the industry now that I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
Mike Davis was in that. Mike Davis is a way better play than he was an hour ago.
Where's Mike? Oh my, Mike Davis's ownership got cut in half.
Right. That's where all the ownership left.
There you go.
So that's a play that I wasn't all that interested in before because I thought that his ownership was going to be relatively inefficient. I think
he's a way better play now.
He goes into that conversation in those Washington Atlanta game stacks that we were talking about or secondary correlations. He's certainly in that conversation now.
I would agree with you. I like that play a lot more than I did an hour ago. That's a great call. Great mid-podcast call. It also just got a lot easier to leverage Trey Sermon, though, because the more lineups that have Trey Sermon, the fewer lineups that are going to have guys like Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle. I mean, if Deebo Samuel is going to be over 10% owned, if George Kittle is going to be over 10% owned, why can't we play Brandon Ayuk?
Brandon Ayuk season.
Yeah,
he projects a lot worse than Deebo Samuel, but still, he's a lot cheaper.
He's $1,500 cheaper.
Yeah, he's a great play.
Yeah, and if he's back to playing full time, there's a range of outcomes where that projection is a little inefficient because it's projecting him as like a 60% snap share player. And if he's back to playing 100% of the snaps, I mean,
this game is very interesting. We have to be careful about this game. So, okay, here's the thing that we have been talking about a lot on our Patreon exclusive podcasts. We are going to see a game in the afternoon slate that's going to carry a lot of ownership in the Rams-Cardinals game. Maybe not as much on the Cardinals side, but the Rams side certainly. If the early leverage busts, we can expect a large portion of the sharper players in the field to pivot off of those Rams stacks onto either Jimmy Garoppolo or Russell Wilson stacks. But they probably still won't carry as much ownership as they should. So this is a game that we need to be thinking about late swapping to if our early lineups have busted.
Right. Yep, I think that's a good call. Something worth keeping in mind in regards to 5K Brandon Ayuk. He played 86% of the snaps last week after playing 47% and 54% in weeks 1 and 2. He might be back to being a full-time player, and if that's the case, his price is inefficient. His price and his ownership will be inefficient.
If he's out of the doghouse, he should be 6K.
Okay, but that's the thing is like he might have never been in the doghouse. It might have genuinely been a he's not fully healthy thing.
Maybe
there were conflicting reports all over the place with Brandon Ayuk.
When Kyle Shanahan literally said he has to be better than the player behind him, I think that pretty much indicates that he was in the doghouse.
Maybe, but I don't know. Kyle Shanahan might just be full of shit. I'm like, if you want to talk about coaches,
that's certainly true.
You want to talk about coaches that I'm just flat out sick of? Kyle Shanahan is at the top of the list. He's at the top of the fucking list.
Can we just fade Trey Sermon, though? I'll eat it if he scores 2 touchdowns. I'm fading him.
Imagine fucking playing Trey Sermon, dude. You know McConnell is going to play Trey Sermon. He's going to play 100% Trey Sermon. And I mean, I might be playing him in 1 season long league because I have to, but I don't need to play Trey Sermon. I'd rather play Zach Moss.
Yeah.
I would much rather play Zach Moss.
So wait, that happened too. Zach Moss also just became like a massive leverage play, right?
I mean, he was already a massive leverage play,
and now he's twice the leverage play he was before.
Exactly. So like that I mean, at the end of this live stream, when I ask you who your favorite leverage play was, I was going to already say either Zach Moss or Darrell Henderson, but now it's clear cut in order from 1 to 3. It's Zach Moss, a massive gap, Ezekiel Elliott, and Darrell Henderson. So
yeah.
So I'm glad we're in the same page on that. Did the Trey Sermon update do anything to George Kittle? Not really.
No.
Not really. So it's too easy to leverage Trey Sermon. You play Zach Moss and then you play like Brandon Ayuk, and you've got plenty of leverage.
4K Kyle Juszczyk in the Millie Maker. That's my Millie Maker play of the week.
Love it. Do it. Fire it up, dude. Like, because Kyle Juszczyk, he'll go 4 for 40 and catch a touchdown, but also rush for 40 yards. Kyle Juszczyk is going to score like 15 DraftKings points, isn't he? Like, that's going to happen. That'd be so funny. I think you should.
I don't play the Millie Maker, but I'll do it this week. Because last week I said Peyton Barber in the Millie Maker, and then he smashed.
Okay, do it in the play action though. Do it in like the 300K play action or something.
The play action is huge too. So
exactly, it's as big as the Millie Maker. So just do it in the play action, just for the.
And you can win 100K to first. Worth the dart.
There you go. Do it for the brand. Anything else from this game? Because I think Steelers-Packers looks fun.
Sure.
No one wants to play Aaron Rodgers. And I don't know. I feel like on weeks when nobody plays Aaron Rodgers, especially when he's got a 25.5 implied team total, that's a little fucked up.
All right, hear me out. Let's talk about how to get different in this game because nobody's going to play Aaron Rodgers.
Nobody's going to play Aaron Jones.
Najee Harris is going to be really owned. Aaron Jones isn't going to carry any ownership. You can stack Aaron Jones with Aaron Rodgers. That thing we saw where he's caught 3 touchdowns, it's an outlier, but it's not that big of an outlier.
Aaron Jones is right in that category as one of the best leverage plays on the slate. Like he's
expensive. He's a leverage play on the Derrick Henry chalk.
That's the thing is he's one of the best projected running backs on the entire slate and no one's going to play him. He's going to be 5% owned in smaller contests. Yeah.
Aaron Jones might be the best leverage play on the slate. He's in the opposite category from those other guys because there's going to be a lot of people that are paying down for those 5K running backs, but the reason they're doing it is so that they can get up to the Alvin Kamara, the Derrick Henry, the Dalvin Cooks. And why aren't we looking at Aaron Jones in that same category as those guys?
Here, let me level with you. Here's the reason why Aaron Jones is actually a better leverage play than Zach Moss. Is there really a range of outcomes, a reasonable probability range of outcomes where Zach Moss is the had-to-have-him play of the week? There is, unlikely. But it's like, it's a 95th percentile outcome. An 80th or 85th percentile outcome from Aaron Jones makes him a had-to-have-him play.
Right, an 80th percentile outcome for Aaron Jones is like 35 to 40 points. And if he gets a 90th percentile outcome, you literally could not win without him on this slate.
You couldn't finish in the top 1 or 2% without him.
Right.
Because he could score 40 DraftKings points. Like
he could score 50. He catches that many passes. If this game gets wild, he could score 50.
He has scored 4 touchdowns in a game twice. This is just what Aaron Jones does.
Yeah.
They give him the football near the goal line or in the red zone more than like any other football player touches the football there.
And he runs routes. Like he's in the end zone catching passes from the 15-yard line. Like this is a real thing that happens.
He's like the team's wide receiver too. He can get the 100-yard bonus on the ground, go 6 for 60 through the air and score 3 touchdowns. He's Christian McCaffrey with a few less snaps. He's literally Christian McCaffrey on less snaps. So I'm
play Aaron Jones in some lineups, basically, is what we're saying.
Yeah, just play a ton of Aaron Jones because he's also going to give you direct leverage on Devontae Adams' chalk. So there's just all the leverage to be had in the world with Aaron Jones.
Devontae Adams might come in at 25% ownership in those smaller field contests.
Right, because he's mispriced. He shouldn't be under 8K.
No, he should be 8,500. Tyreek Hill should too.
All right, glad we agree. Anything else from this game?
Najee Harris is still in play, even though he's going to be a little bit chalky. We can expect him to catch a ton of passes if this game goes. Like Najee Harris, Aaron Jones is actually a play that you could make in the same lineup, and nobody's going to play running backs against each other. And Najee Harris is basically a wide receiver when they get down by 10.
Najee Harris is still mispriced. Actually,
he's
that
playing
reminds
99% of the snaps. It's insane.
I have not looked at the Steelers injury report. I believe Claypool is out, but are any of the other wide receivers out?
I put Juju in my lineup because his injury designation went away, I believe.
Okay, so Juju's going to play. Is Deontay? It looks like Deontay's playing, but Chase Claypool is out. So if you're somebody that believes in vacated targets, there you go. We got one more game on the slate, and then you and I got to get to building some lineups because kickoff is in 2 hours? Yeah, we got 2 hours to build after this. Last game, Ravens-Broncos. Lamar Jackson is going to play, but the Ravens only have a 22.5 implied team total. This game's basically a pick 'em. Talk to me about the game, man.
Lamar Jackson is in play. I don't think I'm going to... I had been getting to a ton of Teddy Bridgewater stacks, and I think they're still in play, especially for large field, but I think generally I'm looking more at the Jimmy Garoppolo stacks in that price range. Cortland Sutton, obviously with all of these vacated targets, is certainly in play. This offense just doesn't project that well. To be totally honest, this is a game that I won't have much stock in just because we're looking at a gross 50-50 split between the Broncos running backs and an even grosser split between Tyson Williams, Latavius Murray, the ghost of Devonta Freeman, and some fullback named Patrick Ricard that gets touchdowns sometimes. So, like, generally, I'm not looking at a ton of plays in this game. I think that as far as the actual decent plays in this game go, Noah Fant and Albert Okwuegbunam are guys that you could definitely throw in some lineups in larger field stuff. Albert O is completely, we're going to see a little bit more 2 tight end sets in this game. Like, that's what's been coming out of camp from the Broncos. So I think Albert O is in play. I don't know. His floor is literally 0 points, so he's definitely a larger field play. But yeah, generally I'm looking more at the defenses than the offenses in this game, and I'm not super excited about any of it.
Lamar Jackson seems pretty too low owned.
Sure. He doesn't project all that well for his price. He's a larger field play for me. And to be totally honest, you can stack him with any one of his weapons, but I'm usually not going to stack him with 2. Like, Marquise Brown projects terribly for his price. And Mark Andrews projects terribly for his price. They're all in play because they all have ceilings and they're all going to be super low owned. But it's just one of those things where in the style that I play in smaller field single entry GPPs, I don't think you need to get here.
Yeah. Really, I mean, this game for me is Lamar Jackson, and that's about it. If we would have got the Javonte Williams free square, I would be pretty heavily exposed to that, as would the field. But I probably would have leveraged the hell out of it too. So, I think the only way I'm getting to this game is if I late swap to it. Honestly,
I think that Noah Fant is a legitimately good play at tight end.
Yeah,
he's not great. He's fine though.
Yeah, I think punting Alberto makes a ton of sense too, so I like that call. All right, I think we've reached the end of the slate, man. You know what's coming. Best leverage play on the slate. I think we already know what it is.
We hammered home the ones that you would think I would say, so those are actually better than this one, but I think that my favorite weird leverage play is Chester Rogers.
I like it. I like the Chester Rogers one a lot. I mean, my 2 favorites are Aaron Rodgers and Zach Moss. Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones and Zach Moss are going to be my favorites. But honestly, I think my version of your Chester Rogers would be KJ Osborne. And
sure,
it's not,
I think they're both completely in play, and they're almost the same play.
Yeah, or Darnell Mooney. I would include Darnell Mooney in there.
Sure. I just like right. I think that other people are going to be leveraging those larger, those higher total games like that, and I think that we can get some weird price point leverage on those 3K wide receivers.
Right. All right. Top game stack. Shoot.
Everybody's going to say all these high total games, and I think that the one that's getting missed is San Francisco. I hate playing Jimmy G, but like he's projecting so well and that game has such a good chance of getting wild that I think either side, Russell Wilson or Jimmy G, are completely in play, but I really like the salary savings that Jimmy G stacks get me.
I dig that. I like that a lot. I also like going to the other side of the Panthers-Cowboys game and playing Sam Darnold.
Sam Darnold was my other one if I was going to say 3.
Yep. Or you can do Russell Wilson, maybe do Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett, or DK Metcalf, Will Dissly, and you run that back with Brandon Ayuk. I think that's a pretty elite game stack as well.
Or even with Sermon projecting for so much ownership now, George Kittle, even at relatively high ownership, is still a leverage play. If you're not going to get Dissly in there and you're just going to go skinny with a run back, you can play Russell Wilson, one of the elite wide receivers, and George Kittle on the other side, and you've got an elite ceiling stack that also leverages the Trey Sermon chalk.
I'm with you. Anything else you want to hammer home before we sign off?
I don't think so. I think we got it this time. I mean, hour and 20 minutes, we better have got there.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's time for me to go and build. I'm so jittery from that freaking Red Bull on an empty stomach. I'm ready to build. We'll see y'all in the Discord. For Joe, my name is Mark Wemkin. We'll see you next week.